right, folks, hopefully you read To Build a Fire last week. We are going to respond to that short story this week in a reader response essay. And I've given you a word count of between 300 and 600 words to respond to that short story. And specifically this week, we're talking about plot and how conflict is required in order for the plot of a short story or a novel to be interesting. You know, if nothing happens that is conflict, it makes for a very boring story. So give at least 3 conflicts in To Build a Fire that make the story more interesting and more suspenseful. Discuss each one separately in its own paragraph and talk about how that makes the story interesting, how the effect that it has on the characters and things like that. And as always, be sure to write an introduction and a conclusion for your essay. And we've been sticking to the 5-paragraph essay. Being in English 101 and English 111 can be tricky if you haven't written a lot of essays in high school, and that's very possible. So we are still sticking to that 5-paragraph essay that has an introduction, 3 plot points, and then a conclusion at the end. You can write this essay without any sources other than the story itself. It's totally possible to do that. I encourage you to do that. However, if you're hoping to get some ideas about conflict and To Build a Fire from other sources, make sure those are reputable sources. You need to be going to Tennessee Electronic Library and going to scholarly journals and academic papers and things like that that are written by professionals in order to get information for To Build a Fire, because that's what you'll do at the college level. You'll only use scholarly articles when you're using a source for a paper. So you can't use things like GradeSaver or Essay Pro or Tutor.com or MyAssignment.help or Help and things like that. Those just aren't scholarly sources. They're another writer's opinion about what you're writing about. We don't want that. We want your opinion, okay? Now, if you're going to a scholarly article written by a college professor in a scholarly magazine to get information about like the meaning of something because you don't understand it yourself, that's completely different. But don't be going to these websites getting help for your essays. This video that I've included for you here is just more information about how to use the Tennessee Electronic Library. Since all of you are Tennessee students, the TEL is a really great resource and it's extremely easy to use. So again, you don't need sources, but if you choose to use them, make sure you're citing them. And your rough draft is due Sunday. We are going to do a rough draft and a final draft this time. And I do have a rubric for your rough draft. Make sure that you include your works cited in your rough draft. To Build a Fire should be on there for sure, and then any other appropriate sources that you might have used. And To Build a Fire is going to be London, comma, Jack, period. To Build a Fire goes in quotation marks, and then there's another period, and then whatever website source information where you found To Build a Fire. And you might actually have a copy of To Build a Fire on paper, like in a book, but that's pretty unlikely. So you're probably going to be using this PDF that I've included for you. So American English, and then all of this information at the end. Of course, you can find out how to do that by going to the online writing lab that we used last year to see how to include a short story on your works cited page. And if you need help with that, you can reach out to me and I'll help you with that. But the online writing lab, let me just click here, owl.purdue.edu. If you go here, then you can find things like an MLA sample paper. We used this website last year. You probably remember it. But if you're wanting to see how to do your works cited page for a short story, if you'll just go to works cited page basic format, or even electronic sources is better because you're probably going to get it on an electronic source. Then you are going to put, the author's name, which is Jack London, the title of the story, which is To Build a Fire, and then all of this other information. And a lot of times you're not going to find this information. And if you can't find something, you just skip over it. See, it says right here, not every will provide all this information. Collect as much as possible and then use this format to put it on your works cited page. Hopefully this looks familiar because we did this a lot last semester. So next, you want to have 5 paragraphs. You do want to write in third person and present tense. That's something that we discussed in Unit 1. We're writing about literature for this entire semester, so you do want to write in third person and use present tense when you're referring to things that happened in the story. Make sure you've got an introductory paragraph with a thesis statement at the end of that paragraph that tells how conflict in the short story are important to the plot. And you can list those conflicts very briefly in that thesis statement, or you can make a general statement about how conflict is important to the plot of To Build a Fire for a variety of reasons. Next, you need to include at least 1 conflict per body paragraph. That's just a part of the organization that we've discussed, which would be a total of at least 3 conflict examples. If you wanted to combine 2 conflicts for 1 body paragraph, I think that would be okay, but that would increase the number of conflicts that you're discussing in your essay. And then lastly, make sure you're using parenthetical citations, and you should have at least 1 per body paragraph, and I really need to change that to at least 1 per body paragraph because you don't necessarily need them in your introduction or in your conclusion, but you do need to have a reference to the story. What part are you talking about in the story in each body paragraph? And I have given you an example of what that should look like. You've got London, who wrote To Build a Fire, and then whatever page number you found the information on that you're discussing. As you can see, there's no comma, and as you can see, the period goes after. All right, I hope that was helpful to you. I just wanted to give you an explanation of this assignment. A lot of times, understanding something is a lot easier if someone just explains it to you rather than you reading the instructions in a very, very brief set of instructions. So I do enjoy explaining that to you, and I hope it's helpful. All right, reach out to me if you have any questions, and have a great week.